the queen gave birth to the most beautiful child ever born to earth. At the age of 15, her finger will be pricked by a loom needle. She will then die. Sleeping Beauty. There lived a pair of king and queen who were desperate because they had no children. They are kind, wise, and generous to everyone. But even so, no child was born from their marriage. One day, the queen took a bath in her bedroom and looked out the window thoughtfully. Suddenly, a frog jumped out of the water and said to the queen, "Oh, my queen, put away your sad face and be glad to hear what I have to say to you. Your wish will be granted, and you will bring a beautiful child into this world within this year." The queen was amazed to hear the happy prediction, but she also couldn't believe hearing the animals speak. However, it turned out that the frog was right. Several months later, the queen gave birth to the most beautiful child ever born to earth. Because of her beauty, the child was named Aurora by her parents. Then, her father decided to throw a big party to celebrate the birth of his daughter. He invited the nobles, his immediate family, and friends. Not to forget, the royal fairies were also invited to look after the princess. There are 13 royal fairies to be invited to the party. However, it seems that not all fairies will come. The king and queen plan to serve a lavish set of cutlery at a banquet to honor the fairies. The cutlery is a plate made of gold and decorated with precious stones. But alas, there are only 12 plates. So, they had to decide not to invite the 13th fairy. The fairy had not been seen for a very long time. The party was lively and magnificent. When the party was almost over, the fairies took turns approaching the princess. Each fairy gave her a gift in the form of various kinds of gifts. The first fairy bestows virtue on Aurora. The second fairy gives beauty. The third fairy gives a voice as melodious as nightingale's voice. The fourth fairy gives kindness. The fifth fairy gives wisdom, and so on. But when the 11th fairy was about to give her gift, the 13th fairy suddenly appeared angry in a flash of fire and smoke. "Apparently you guys forgot to invite me to this beautiful party. However, I don't want to miss out. I also want to give this child a proper birth present," said the evil fairy in a loud voice. "So listen, the princess will certainly be the most beautiful child in this kingdom and will be loved by everyone. But at the age of 15, her finger will be pricked by a loom needle. She will then die." The guests screamed sadly, and the queen shed tears, while the evil fairy laughed viciously. Luckily, the 12th fairy had not given her gift yet. She approached Aurora's swing. "I don't have the power to erase the bad fate that has been given to her, but I can at least ease it. Aurora's finger will be pricked by the loom needle when she turns 15, but she won't die. Later she will sleep for 100 years, until a prince comes to wake her up with a gentle kiss." The party soon stopped. The king then ordered all the looms in the kingdom to be burned. People then witnessed massive burning in every hamlet, village, and every city. No more spinning wheels and looms could be found in his kingdom. The women even forgot how to spin. During that time, Aurora continued to grow up. Thanks to the kind fairies who pray for her, she becomes the most enchanting young girl in the world. Everything about her is generosity and beauty. The king and queen, who loved her very much, began to forget the curse of the evil fairy. How could Aurora's finger be pricked if all the looms had been obliterated throughout the kingdom? On the day Aurora turned 15, her parents were out for a walk. The young girl alone wandered through the halls of the palace. Unknowingly, her footsteps led her to the tallest tower. Suddenly, a strange light appeared before her. Then, Aurora was attracted to a small room where an old woman was spinning wool on a loom. "What's that?" screamed Aurora, staring at the spun wool. "May I try it?" But just as she tried the loom, a needle pricked her finger. Aurora was fast asleep. The old woman, who was not evil, went to seek help. However, nothing could wake the poor princess. The king then put his daughter in the most beautiful room in the palace. Then Aurora slept on a bed of gold and brocade. When lying down, the princess looked very beautiful with her beautiful long hair and bright red lips. She looks like an angel from heaven. Even everyone who came to her bedside was stunned at her flawless beauty. Upon learning the news, the 12th fairy came running to Aurora's sleeping bed. Then she looked at her affectionately. "If time goes on, you will be alone when you wake up from your sleep. I'm afraid you will feel isolated later," thought the kind fairy. The fairy wants the princess to be able to rediscover the world she already knows, even up to 100 years later. Finally, the fairy put everyone in the palace to sleep with her magic wand. The king and queen slowly fell asleep first. In quick succession, everyone started to fall asleep, starting from the nobles, palace servants, nannies, dogs, horses, chickens, and geese. All fell asleep immediately. Even the fire in the fireplace was starting to freeze. Then the cooked roast meat turned to stone. After all that happened, a thorn hedge slowly grew around the palace. Every day, the strange forest seemed to grow bigger and bigger. A few days later, the tall tower of the palace was not even visible anymore. The legend of the Sleeping Beauty spread across the land. The prince came to conquer the thorn forest. However, the thorns were so sharp that they injured the prince. No one has yet been able to get past that strange fortress. Even the fortress caused several princes to die. Time after time passed, people started to forget the legend that there was a sleeping princess in the forest of thorns. One day, there was a prince who came to rest in that land. He had even heard of legends about the palace. For all he knew, there was a magnificent palace behind the thorn hedge. Inside is a beautiful princess who has slept for 100 years. The princess lay sleeping until a prince came, but that palace couldn't be conquered. Many people have tried their luck, but in vain. The prince was curious to see the sleeping beauty in the palace. He ran to conquer the thorny forest. Warnings from people around are considered not too important to him. But as he approached the palace, how surprised he was to see the hedges open by themselves and strewn with roses. 100 years had passed, and the hedge had begun to weaken. Then the prince explored the halls of the palace, where the occupants of the kingdom slept. Then, with a pounding heart, the prince continued to push the thousands of doors in the palace, until finally he found a golden room and a beautiful princess who was fast asleep. She is so beautiful and looks so perfect. The prince was amazed by her beauty. He could no longer take his eyes off her and slowly drew closer to give her a kiss. When he kissed her, Aurora woke up from her sleep. After that, the prince and the princess walked down the main stairs, smiling and holding hands. The king and queen woke up from their sleep as if nothing had happened. Then, all the occupants of the kingdom returned to their work as before. Simultaneously, the meat began to be cooked again in the fireplace. Some time later, Aurora and the prince married. They lived happily. The kingdom returned to its former glory